So this is going to be a demonstration of how the shape meshing pipeline works. Now there's no one way of doing it because it all depends on what the design is like. So there are a number of different modules and a number of different ways to use it. It's pretty open-ended. So a couple of things that we're going to need first of all is the AI node importer. So we're going to import that. What this does is it brings in a series of Illustrator files, which is the base format that we're going to be working with. So I work in Flash or in Adobe Animate, and what we do is we output our images as Illustrator files. So for this example, I've got 4 layers. So let's go ahead and do an import. Okay, here in the AI folder, we're going to start. We just have to choose one, and it will bring in the sequence. So what this is doing is a couple of things. It's bringing in the Illustrator files and converting them to NURBS curves, and it's also deleting anything that's too small. So there's a tolerance that you can set. It's important that the files that you give it are pretty clean, but when you're doing hand-painted stuff, there's always tiny little holes or tiny little specks in the artwork. So this will delete those based on the tolerance as they come in. So here we got our first AI sequence, and if we take a look at the outliner, you can see how it brings it in. It brings it in based on the name, and then what we have is a series of shapes, and what it does is it uses the largest shape that it can find, and it parents the subshapes underneath of it, because we can't express a shape as a single NURBS curve. It's probably going to have multiple shapes, or it's going to have multiple holes, or it's going to have shapes within holes, any variety of that. So it basically takes the biggest curve, calls that the parent, and any subcurve goes underneath that, and that's basically how that's going to work. Now there's a couple other things that go on through this, which we can get to later on. You can see that this group here actually has a tolerance within it. You can set the tolerance later on if a shape isn't behaving properly. But anyways, let's just continue on with this, bring in the rest of the shapes that I want to work with. So I've got base, I've got baseline. I don't believe that my artwork is that particularly clean, but well, I guess it came in okay. All right, so let's actually I've got 4 shapes here, but we're going to start with just these 2 to begin with. So one of the things that this gives you when you bring it in is it has an offset here, and that's just working for, when you're painting in Flash, the space that you're working in typically doesn't work for Maya space. In the Flash canvas, the 0, point is at the top left-hand corner of the canvas, not necessarily in the center of the screen. So what you're drawing in Flash won't necessarily come into where you want it to be. So the first thing we've got is this little offsetter. That just allows us to reposition the artwork without affecting the move channel. So that's pretty simple. And then we've got scale as well. Get this going. So now we've got a series of NURBS curves, and that's actually kind of useless to us. What we need to do is we need to turn this into a flat mesh. So we're going to use a module which makes use of a planar surface and a couple other things. We're going to bring in planar surface here, ShapeMeshing planar sequence, and what I'm going to do is this guy takes curve groups. So I'm going to give him these 2 curve groups, and I'm going to let this run through. So this module, okay, it wants a short name for the first one. We're just going to name it the same thing. We'll call it base. And what do we get? Well, this gives us a piece of geometry with a little basic control object here and a frame attribute. And what this is doing is it's basically flipping through those curves that we gave it, and it's giving us a flat piece of mesh with a certain resolution of geometry. Now, it doesn't know how much geometry you want, because the shape can sometimes be big and sometimes be small. And if you subdivide this big shape with the same values as the small shape, well, your small shape is going to have much denser mesh, or in this case, things are just not going to work. So what you have over here is you've got its resolution maximum, resolution minimum, and depending on what you're going to be doing with your mesh, you may want more or less resolution for the geometry. So in my case here, I want to have a bit more resolution. So I'm gonna crank up my res max to about 4,000, 5,000. And I'm just crank it down to down here. So here at the minimum, you can see this looks like a minimum size. We're going to crank this up a little bit. Okay, so now at its minimum and maximum, the resolution looks pretty much the same. Another thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set my scene length to the length of the animation. By default, this thing gives you only as many frames. as you've got. So 1 to 57. All right, I'm going to set my scene to 1 to 57. That's going to come in handy later on with what we're doing. And just for fun, I'm going to key this here. I'm going to key this on frame 1, and I'm going to go to 57, and I'm going to key that. I'm going to key that there as well. So as I structure my timeline, I can see how it's going. And hopefully, every frame will be working. Sometimes if your mesh is a little bit messy, sometimes, oh, here we go. We got a bit of an issue on one of these guys. If your drawings are a bit messy, you will get an issue. I can see that drawing number 14 seems to be causing an issue, but you know, I'm not seeing any problem with the mesh, so it looks like it's okay. We can live with it. So I just give it a go through one time to make sure that everything's working. What was that? Ah, okay. So here's a fault. So I can see there's something wrong with frame 34, getting a hole in the mesh there. That means that the planar operation is failing. One easy way to fix it is to go into the guts of this guy here. So now you can see we no longer have a group of mesh. It's created sort of like a mini rig. If I go into setup and go into the shapes and find a curve number 34, usually you can fix it by tinkering with the tolerance. So I'm just going to say 0.2. No, that didn't seem to do it. Number 34, are we on the right curve? Yeah. How about 0.5? Oh, there we go. There. So fix a tolerance. If you got a problem with the mesh, just go to that curve and fiddle with the tolerance, and that will generally fix the problem. In fact, I haven't encountered a single bug that couldn't be fixed by jiggling the tolerance. But this shape is looking pretty good. This guy's looking pretty good. Now, I'm actually not going to be sculpting this shape. I'm going to be sculpting his buddy. I'm going to save this for later. So I'm going to turn that off for now. Just hide that. And I'm going to bring this guy back in. This is the guy who I'm actually going to be doing the sculpting on. And as you can see, it's got a kind of a different shape. It's got a negative shape to it, so I'm kind of playing with something I haven't played with before. So this is the kind of shape that I'm going to be working with. So we're going to do the same deal for this guy. We're going to grab this, and we're going to do a build. I'll just quickly go through what we've got in the control object here. We've got this thing called flip. If perhaps you would want this shape to be facing in the other direction, then you can see the normals are facing that way. But by default, we interpolate our curves as forward is on the plus Z axis. So we can see here we've got Z. The axis is Z. If we had perhaps made our curves on a different axis, then we would set this to something else. If I set this to something else here, it's going to screw up. So we'll just leave it at the default, which is Z. We're not going to flip it. And yeah, it does appear that I made a mistake. I did make a mistake. There is actually a popping image there. And I don't like that. Okay, so there's a problem with the drawings. All right, well, that's good to know. So easy fix. We know that this is on frame 11, so what we're going to do is just go up into our shapes. There's a bunch of stuff going on in here that I'm not actually going to be using in this case. But what I am going to be doing is we're going to be finding that screwy shape, this one, number 11. Okay, number 11. And let's just hide everything except that. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to delete that. I don't want that. That's no good. So we kill that shape. That's a bad shape. Okay, there we go. So now our shape is fixed. That's good. That's good. All right. So good thing about this is that you do have the option to go in and fix a lot of the problems. You don't have to redo your drawings and re-export. You can fix a lot of stuff in the program. It doesn't care. You can even go in and manually edit those NURBS curves if you want. I mean, sometimes the drawings are a bit sloppy. Sometimes you want to clean things up, and you have that support. The only thing you can't really do is add to the shapes. You can't make anything new. You can delete, you can change, but making something new, that requires that doesn't quite work. You would have to do some tricky business for that. So you can delete things, you can edit things, you cannot add anything new to it. So that's looking pretty good. So we've got two of our little shapey rigs in here, and this is a good time to save. So I'm going to do a save. Do like that. Okay, so now we've got our basic shape, which we want to make our sculptures out of. So this is where things can get a little bit funky. Now we don't necessarily have just one method of sculpting things. I mean, there's any number of things you could do to this mesh to turn it into geometry that actually works well. Not everything is going to be the same kind of shape. So what do you do? How do you solve for that? Well, you have to create a library of sculpt formulas, of ingredients for a sculpture recipe. Running this thing through the mesh functions, this got 57 frames. It's going to take a while to create all the mesh. So one thing I put into this is kind of like a test feature. We're going to test a single frame to see how it works. And I'm actually going to go a little bit earlier in time. I'm going to say about here. We're going to test this frame because this has less geometry. We'll see how it works with this. So what I'm going to do is we are going to import ShapeMesher mesh functions as M1. And what I'm going to do is say, so we've got the main function inside here is build, and test is going to be true. Now what I want to add to this thing, yes, I want the extrude edge, yes, I want the relax, I want the ray spinner, and I want the mush. I had this set up for a similar smoke effect, so this should probably work for this one too. So here's kind of a recipe for how I'm going to sculpt this one. And as long as test is turned on, we can't cause too many problems. So what we're going to do is we're just going to run this, and let's give it a go. See how that works. Okay, so it's now it's just done. It's just done the first two functions. Now it's doing the mesh spinner. You can see it's going through there. The mesh spinner is actually not quite as speedy as I'd like it to be, but I've got some plans on how to fix it in the future. So here it goes, boppity boppity bop. All right, so that doesn't look too bad. You know, I think that maybe this this recipe is actually probably going to work for this type of design. Yeah. Now, of course, I could put a mirror on this and like make it go in both directions, but I don't particularly want to shoot this from all angles. I want to keep it designy. I want to keep it facing one direction. So I can show you, I can tell you what has just happened here. The first thing that it did was it did an extrude edge. It extruded the edge all the way around, which gives us, gives us kind of a decent geometry around the edge, because we can't have this grid going right to the edge. We need it to be a bit, the topology of the final mesh should reflect the design in a nicely topologized way. Okay, so the first thing this does is it gives nice topology to the edge. The next thing it does is it does kind of like it does a relax, which just like relaxes out the geometry a bit. And then the ray spinner, what that does is it sculpts it out based on the distance from the edge. Which edge? Well, it chooses a bunch of different points on a bunch of different edges, and it says, okay, I think I'm supposed to bump out this much. So basically, it means that a point here, which has a lot of space in all directions, will bump out, and then like a point here, which has not so much space, will bump out. And basically, it's just a formula for making a nice looking sculpt, which is a bit more than just your usual, extrude. And then what I've got finally is a mush, which is a mush deformer. Delta mush. Does a delta mush. A delta mush with a few little extra ding-dongs attached to it. So this is looking pretty good, except you know what? I'm liking this so much that I want it to bump out a bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say bump 40. You know what? Let's do bump 60. And we'll see how that works. And, I could actually give it some more divisions around the edge if I wanted to, with its divisions over here, but I'm pretty happy with 2. The point is, in my opinion, to have the very minimum amount of geometry that you need for what you're doing. I don't want this to be like loaded down with mesh. As far as I can tell, this is going to render pretty nicely. So the next thing we're going to do is, with our mesh selected, is we're going to say test equals false. We've got our setup that we like, and we know what we're doing, so let's go. Test equals false. Nothing is selected. I've got to select the thing, and here we go. And now it's going to step through every single shape, and it's going to sculpt it. And in the end, we're not going to have just a dummy mesh. We're going to have a mesh that's actually connected to the rig. The ray spinner is the slowest of all the sculpt recipes, so I usually save this for the hero stuff. It's also doing a couple other things too. There's a default option inside of the mesh builder, which is called cleanup, and that just basically, it merges vertices that are within a certain tolerance. It finds 5-sided faces and it triangulates and then quadrangulates them. So what we get in the end is as close to a clean mesh as we can generate. You don't know. There might be tiny little holes in these drawings that are causing puckers in the mesh. It's really tough to tell until the whole thing's been built. But we work with the tools that we've got. Holy crap! It's gone bananas. All right, so we see we've got a problem with a shape over there that needs to be fixed. I haven't seen that bug in a while, so we're gonna go back through and fix one of those shapes. Okay, time to get back to the swing of things. The thing has finished going. It took about 20 minutes to run. Let's see if we can find that bad frame. Here it is. Okay, so we got a bad one here, number 4. So what are we gonna do? Well, let's just fix it. So much in the same way that we've got a big group of curves from before. Now we've got a big group of mesh. Number 4 is not working. So what are we gonna do? Well, you know what? Let's just when it first creates the geometry, it just animates the visibility of all of them, so you can scrub through and see what it looks like. But there's nothing else controlling them. They're just dumb mesh. You can see in the node editor here. There's nothing really going into it, I don't believe. Yeah, it's just got a visibility going in. That's all. So there's nothing dynamic about this anymore. Any changes we were going to make, we need to make them on the original rig, which thankfully we still have. So let's crank this guy back to number 4 because I need to remake this shape. This shape isn't working. If we set this to actually frame, in this case frame 4, so I'll put that to number 4. Okay, so we're back on frame 4, and this guy is not working. I'm just going to move him for now. Let's see. See, there's something wrong with this shape. It's not giving us a good shape, and I have some reason to believe that it could be this right here. See that inverted shape? That could be causing the math to fail. So what are we going to do? We're going to do the same thing we always do when we have bad shapes. We're going to go into the curve, and we're going to change the tolerance. And I'm actually going to crank the tolerance up, maybe 0.5. See if we can get rid of that. That looks good, except it's a bit too chunky. Let's bring it to 0.2. Yeah, that might do the job. That might do the job. So changing the interpolation of the shape will work. So what I want to do next is I'm just going to create a new shape. We've still got the same settings we had before. I'm going to turn test back on true because I do not want to do the whole sequence again. I just want to do this one. So I'm going to grab this guy, run this sucker. I'm going to move this out of the way so we can see what the whole thing is doing. Let's go full screen because I really like watching the race spinner spin. And let's run that. Alrighty. And here it goes. Now the shape's working fine now. There we go. So you can see, you know, having dirty curves can be a problem. It doesn't matter how many holes you have. It doesn't matter how many pieces you have. But if you've got like figure-8 curves, there's no way to interpolate. There's no way to figure out what's the inside, what's the outside, how far to the edge. You know, your curves have to be clean. So a lot of the stuff that was put into this, like the AI node importer, which deletes tiny shapes. The flipper of the basic curve rig. There's a lot of stuff to combat it, but you know you still encounter things here and there. There's really no getting away from it. All right, so there we go. We got our new shape. It looks pretty good to me. We need to stick this guy where he's actually going to go. So this was a test shape, so he actually lives here as test 4 geo, but we don't want him to be test 4 geo. He's actually going to be one of our guys here. So let's get out of super duper mode, and we see we've got this guy down there. I'm gonna make this a bit bigger and pull this guy up. He's actually going to be here, and it does matter the order that you put these in. I think. And this guy, you get to disappear. Actually, let me copy your name first. You get to disappear, and you get to do that. And there we go. Now we've got our fixed guy. And I could animate the visibility so he works the rest of the other ones, because otherwise we're going to have that. So let's just do that manually. Key that on, key that off, and key that off. This is not a necessary part of the process. It's just for visualization. You know, these things, we could have them all. Whoa, am I crashing? I certainly hope not. I really should. Okay, oh good. You know what? Let's hit save. Let's save now that we've spent 20 minutes creating the geometry. So let's go in here and save it. You'll notice one thing is that the file size gets quite large because it's kind of like you got an Alembic file within your scene. So you can see the file's 30 megabytes big. There's no way around that. That's just the way it is. It's got as much data as there are points, and you know, so you got to make a choice. You got to make a choice as to how dense you're going to make it. What are we going to do next? Well, we've got a bunch of geometry here, and that's not useful for for production. What are you going to do with that? That's crap. Okay, so let's close up some of the things here. So what we've got here in the rig is we still actually have the rig wired up, for cases like we just saw where we might want to make a change and fix to some of the mesh. But what we're actually going to do is we're going to delete this whole rig, because all I care about now is that. All I care about is this geo group. And what we're going to do with this geo group is we're going to pull up another module, which is the ShapeMesher Alembic module, which is used for creating the asset, and it's used for exporting and all this kinds of stuff. Okay, so what do we want? We want the Alembic module. I wonder if I stuck it. Oh, here it is. Okay, so we're going to import the ShapeMesher Alembic, and what do? Well, we're going to grab the mesh. We're going to grab the group that contains the mesh. We're going to run Unify, and you can run this on pretty much any group that has mesh in it. But here we go. And now this is what we actually want. So if we grab this guy and just isolate it, you can see we've got a piece of geometry with a frame attribute, and as I scrub through it, it animates. That is exactly what we want to have. And there's one more thing that this guy does that I want to mention. It's that Alembic has a tendency to not like it if a frame of your cache has nothing inside of it. So this guy takes everything that's outside of the mesh, and you can see here we got pretty much the frames. This is a choice node. This choice node has in the very first plug and in the very last plug it's got this null shape. That's just a very, very tiny cube. So it's like 1/100% of a unit big cube just stuck in there. So that any time when the mesh is not visible, you're not actually dealing with zero data. You've actually got, it's a tiny little mesh. Maybe I can frame it. No, it's too small to see. Oh yeah, there it is. You can sort of see it. It's too small for the camera to even pick up. But anyway, so that's one of the things that happens with this, and it gives it no shader. So let's just give it a Lambert, and there we go. Now we've still got a lot of junk in the scene that we want to get rid of, but that sort of stuff isn't automated. That's left to the user to decide if they want to keep things live or keep working with it. But we do have something we can use for our final mesh here, which is working pretty good. And I'm basically going to build this, put a custom rig around this. There's a couple other modules we're going to use for the rig, but this is going to be pretty standard. Translate, rotate, scale, put a little deformer on it if we want to, like a bend or whatever. And yeah, but that is basically the first steps of creating a shape mesh asset.